Hey, fellow G&Ters, those of us like our spirituality with a twist. So, question of the week is, have you ever been on a meditation retreat? Follow-up question will be, what's special about the retreats that we're trying to run? Because this is our post-retreat recap episode. Daniel and
Mm-hmm.
I are just going to do a little freestyle on this, very freestyle episode, where we're going to like kind of share a little bit about our retreat thing over the weekend and a little bit maybe what we learned and a little bit like what we're trying to communicate through these retreats that we're running that maybe might have a little bit of our own, to be French, savoir-faire, a little bit of our
Ooh.
own style. Ooh la la.
Ooh la la.
Um,
Sacré-bleu.
so before that, though, if you could do all the things that everybody always asks you to do, like subscribe, share an episode with a friend, all the good things, write a review, all the nice stuff, greatly appreciated. We're trying to get our little spiritual message out to everybody. So the more we can get that going, it is appreciated. All right. Well, we don't really have much of a playbook for this one. Usually we're all scripted up, but we're not this time.
Not this time.
Um, I think maybe we'll like I know from my side I was thinking, well, what's kind of unique about how we're doing this is what popped in my mind when we decided we are going to do it this way. So I think one of the things I can share is
Well,
that
Eric, before we give a little
oh yeah,
context, because
context for which part?
well, so we this
Oh,
weekend
you're
we
going to tell the tale of what we did. Go ahead.
yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so this past weekend we ran a meditation retreat.
Half a week, I
Con
guess, right? Started on a Wednesday, went to a Sunday.
yeah, so we did like 5 days. We did like a tantric meditation retreat. Buddhist tantric meditation practices and things like this. So for us, this is something. I mean, Eric has been going on retreat for many years. I've been going on retreat for many years. Just an aside on retreats, I would say, and Eric, you feel free to jump in. A retreat is for those who don't know, it's a time period that you take away from society, away from your normal routine, and you dedicate yourself to a certain thing. So you can have a horse riding retreat, you can have a yoga retreat, you can have they have like these dinner retreats where you'll have meal, like 7 course meals that are paired with wines and that's everything is based around eating and things like this. All kind of retreats for everything, couples retreats, whatever, right? Art. I don't know, business, everything else. So our retreat was on meditation. It's basically to take your focus and learn and practice. So that's kind of what we were doing together as a small group. Place kind of downstate Illinois for the weekend, and that's the background, Eric. So I just wanted to put that in there before we moving forward.
Yeah, and this is kind of like one of the, we have lots of little side passions within this passion project of doing these podcasts. And this is sort of one of the side passions, I guess you'd say, one of the branching passions.
Mm,
We really wanted to be able to do this in a way where we'd ultimately be able to operate, offer these kinds of experiences to people, right?
yeah.
So that's been kind of one of our goals too. We keep chipping away at our little podcast goals, but this is our second annual one of doing it, contemplating maybe doing one in the fall too, because it's enjoyable for us and you get to share cool stuff with other people too. Yeah.
Hmm.
So as far as like meditation retreats, spiritual retreats, I'll just throw out some of the stuff that I think is really unique about like the experience of doing this together with you, Daniel, right? I did my first Zen retreats going back into my 20s. And, Zen retreats are very serious, kind of austere. Not that we're not serious, but maybe we're not austere. They have a certain quality to them. They're intense. They're a little bit like spiritual marathons. That was my sort of introductory experience to doing these things. And like, you can always, depending on how you learn something initially, you can always sort of make your comparisons back, right? This is my first experience doing this. How do other things feel kind of relative, right? And since that time I've done retreats and especially like Tibetan Buddhist stuff, obviously tantric Buddhist stuff, Vajrayana stuff. So I'll be able to make some comparisons there too. But just for, like one of the things I think we're doing is there's a few things I think that are very unique and very cool. So one of the ones was that, and this taps into Daniel's sort of shamanic part of what he's offering, right? We do this sort of initial ceremonial start to the retreat. So we rolled up on like a Wednesday night, kind of meet and greet. We all get to know each other a little bit. It's a nice time to start developing a sense of spiritual community too. You get to connect with other people who are taking the time away to like spend time working on themselves. It's actually quite moving. When you go there and you see, wow, people are actually care about this enough to take time and space out of their life to go and devote some of them, some of themselves, some of their energy, some genuine work being done. But it's actually very touching. So we got that part going on. But what we've done the last two retreats, and this really again comes from our desire to be integrative in our spirituality, is Daniel does sort of a more shamanic based ritual for the first morning, which I think is very unique and very cool. So kind of like an offshoot of what Daniel does anyway is kind of a cacao ceremony thing. And maybe I'll let you explain more about the cacao ceremony part, but you run one of those as the start of this. And again, not something that, I would have done in a Zen thing or in a Tibetan thing, but I think it creates a very kind of unique experience for the starting of that. Get your mind and your spirit into a certain space, creates a bond within the group too. So I think there's all kinds of great things that happen there. I'll let you explain more about that, Daniel, because obviously
Yeah,
this is your expertise. But from an experiential side, I was like, oh, this is a cool way to start. And not something I would have thought of, but what I love about what we're doing is we each end up, you and I each bring different aspects of things to what we're doing, which I think is very nicely complimentary. Anyways,
yeah. No, no, I think so. Yeah, so cacao ceremony is how I start generally all of the retreats that I am, part of or leading anyways. I just so what is a cacao ceremony, or at least what do I do? And I've been doing this for a long time. And actually, this is a good segue. Maybe I could put a link in the description. But the next one I'll be doing is June 19th in the North Shore of Chicago, in I think Kenilworth. I don't know where the yoga studio is. That sounds good though. So it's a combination of like a ceremonial grade cacao, which is like a, bitter chocolate, if you will, and it's infused with like cinnamon and cayenne and some honey and things like this, and vanilla. And it's a very, they call it a grounding medicine, but actually there's some vasodilation qualities to the cacao. And it really, it's a bitter medicine. So it sort of helps to relax the blood vessels in Chinese medicine, we could say, right? Bitter.
I
It
think in
helps.
the kidney yang part, like people think of it as a kidney yang tonic too, right? It has those sort of like tonifying qualities. For our TCM people, this is like
Yeah,
for our retreat, it's good. I'm sorry, Danny, for interrupting you, but like it's
you're
just
good.
fascinating because it kind of builds up like what they would call the inner fire. It kind of sparks that
Yes.
constitutional fire, and we spend a lot of time thinking about the fire that's in the pelvis, the fire that's in that kind of like
Mm.
sacred space, right? It kind of
Hmm.
creates that. And what I love about what you do with it is it has all these nice spicy, acrid things, which are also kind of like
Yes.
triggers for that fire too. You can think
Yep.
of the alchemical fire of transformation gets a little spark in that first morning, and it's very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And it's nice for the blood. It's nice for the heart. The blood
Yeah, it
vessels are very
stimulates the heart.
relaxed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So everything is nice and open. And then we do a bunch of breath work, standing exercises, meditative exercises while we're seated, and then some what we refer to as like holotropic breath work while people are lying down. So it's a very, sort of fast-paced breathing through the nose and through the mouth. I guess those are the only places you could breathe through. But it's fast-paced breathing. It's slow and it's long, then it works faster, then it slows back down, and it's done in a communal setting, and it's mixed with, I have gongs and bowls and bells and chimes and things like this that people are taken to very relatively intense places, I would say, maybe slightly uncomfortable. But then on the other side of that little bit of uncomfortability is a deep relaxation. It's like wringing the rag out. You got to like really squeeze a rag if you want to get the water out of it. But then when you're done doing that, it's relatively dry. And this is much like how the body needs to be wrung out sometimes. And so there are different opportunities for people to find themselves with, somatic release. So sometimes it's during the standing part when we do some yelling or something like this. But sometimes it's when we're breathing really, really slowly and really intentionally, that people find such deep relaxations and they can let go. They can let go of whatever is sort of ailing them and release it, right? And so I've learned a bit of that practice combining the cacao and the breath work some years ago, and have just been building on it ever since. And it's something that I've been offering to the public in the public spheres for, I don't know, probably 9 years at this point, and just perfecting it as the years go by. But it's a really great way to start things out, and it's an individual, like baseball. It's an individual sport, but played together as a team. So you're having your own experience. Your eyes are closed. There's people all around you, and you can hear them, but you're not interacting with them in the direct sense. But because you're doing it together, it's a shared experience. And so when we're done, everybody gets to kind of talk a little bit about their experience, and it's nice to hear other people's experience when you're having your own. Sometimes it fills some gaps in from where you might have heard something or thought something at one point, and then somebody else had maybe a mirrored thought or some other feeling that came up at that time. It really builds a nice sort of somatic bond, but then also like a psychic bond because people were there sharing at the same time. And it really does a nice job of weaving people's time together. And it builds a connection that really lasts for the rest of the weekend. So it's nice to start that way.
Yeah, I think the thing from the experiential side for me, now having done this like twice with you in these two retreat experiences where it's happened, is like again like something like a Zen retreat or some of these other kinds of retreats could like be a little bit more austere. And this is actually, you could talk about the cathartic aspects, which I'm no doubt people would have that. For me, from the experiential side, there's music. You get to dance a little bit. You get to like kind of like move your body around to the music. And I'm like, okay, this is very freeing
Mm,
with the idea of using the breath and again a little bit of something that's medicinal, right, as part of this too. And but then there's a part where Daniel just have music playing, and you close your eyes and you get to move around in the space to the music, and you sort of feel the freeness of that. And that's not going to happen in every single retreat space. I think it's a very interesting way to start something, right?
mm,
Create a lot of like it creates a tone that this is going to be free, this is going to be accepting, this is going to be safe, and it's in some ways it's going to be fun, right? Because you can feel the music, you get to move. I was laughing because I think back in the day when the Doctor Strange movie came out, the first one, which was good, the
yeah.
second one, meh, meh, but the first one was a lot of fun. Daniel had called me like I had not remembered the release date. But he said our movie's coming out, and I was like, "What? Doctor Strange? That's us." I was like, "Okay." Great. But I was there, and it's one of those great things. Everyone's eyes are closed. You get to have the music, you get to vibe with the music, you get to kind of be in the space. And I was feeling very much like I was connecting to the energetic directional stuff, right?
Hmm.
We had kind of talked about connecting to the energies of the different directions, and I was just sort of like moving my hands to feel the directions, a la Doctor Strange, except I didn't have the little metal wristband thing or whatever.
Mm, yeah, you need that.
Yeah, but I really felt the space of it, and like all of that kind of stuff as we are kind of doing the musical part. It feels very freeing, and it sets a different tone for a retreat. Relatively speaking, it's a much more free way to start something, which I've come to from the two times we've done it. I kind of appreciate it. I think it's kind of a great way to do things. And by the end, you're kind of laying there at the end. You're kind of doing more of like a corpse pose kind of a thing, relatively
Hmm.
speaking, right? and um and then Daniel will do stuff that really has that shamanic feeling of like sound. So a lot of like gong and drum and flute and these things to kind of use the sound as like a kind of a closer out to the whole experience, and you can kind of let your mind wander within all of that you know
Hmm.
and I think with Daniel's experience, one of the things he's trying to do is to synchronize what he's doing with sort of what's happening within the members of the group too. So that's all very cool to kind of be a part of.
Hmm.
That's a unique thing. I think that's very interesting for what you kind of like brought into this, from the shamanic side. The other part that's a little bit different too, and it was alluded to in what you were talking about earlier, is like the way that we kind of do group processing.
Mm.
And
Oh,
I
yeah,
think
in
this,
comparison to traditional
yeah,
meditation setting.
yeah. Where at the end of a session, this reminds me a little bit like a group therapy thing too, to be honest, right? Where people get to kind of like share their experience with one another, right? And again, in kind of what you'd have to call a safe space setting, you know?
Yeah.
And I think we can definitely like testify that we're pretty like good at setting safe spaces because we had a lot of people who didn't necessarily know each other coming in, and people feel comfortable within it, you know. So you can kind of like trust that the space is going to be held in the way that you can kind of be yourself,
Yeah.
have your experiences, and then also be able to share it with others. So like for me, I got like a psych undergrad, right? As well as being like a, TCM person, teacher of TCM, but that feeling of like, okay, let's create a space where we can all share. And that includes, Daniel and I sharing about our experiences. I kind of described some of the stuff that was kind of emotional for me too. Maybe I'll share a little bit more of that later in this very pod. But it's a really kind of interesting addition to have, right?
Mm.
Again, I like a couple of things I think again, with someone who's done a lot of different kinds of retreats, I think this is on Daniel's impetus to bring these two things in. I vibe very well with both of them. And I really connect to the idea of like, okay, let's at the end of a round, we can talk and share our experience. It has a group therapy kind of a vibe to it on some
Mm-hmm.
level,
Mm-hmm.
like where you can kind of create that community bond and people can kind of share their experiences within it. And that, I think that's very cool too. You got more you want to say about that, Daniel? Or
I think in a lot of ways, the sharing of an experience in a communal setting after you're done is really great. Obviously, there are downsides because if somebody has some kind of like amazing, mind-blowing, transcendental experience and the person next to them is maybe a little bit more mid in terms of what they, what they had at that particular time, it could feel maybe in some ways competitive on a sense. Not necessarily that like you want to make your story sound better than the person next to you, but you might be comparing what you went through in contrast to someone else. And you might be feeling a little bit like, oh, well, I didn't talk to my deceased grandmother like they did. Oh, man. So you might feel there might be a little bit of this kind of internal talk, but there's always some wisdom that gets passed forth in people's experiences. And it's oftentimes the people that are reluctant, that are reticent to share, that have some really profound things come through not necessarily like in a grandiose way, but like in a really quiet kind of a way that uh, transmits power, but like from a very close proximity. And that's really nice. And I've seen that happen so many times. So it's just nice for people to be able to talk in a public setting because that's such a very difficult thing for most human beings to do. So this is one way to be able to work on that skill in a very low stakes setting, right? Everyone's sitting on the ground. We've just been breathing and dancing together for the last couple hours. So people are pretty chill and relaxed. But then in another sense, it's nice to be able to hear other people's, how do you want to say it, like struggles and triumphs in the same time period that you were going through yours. So it really builds a nice bond. And to be able to share that over and over again after our sessions, I think really helps to build people's connection together. That's the Sangha about the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha, the sort of three treasures or three jewels, if you want, of the Buddhist tradition.
I was just going to say that because it has a very strong Sangha feeling, and it's not always obvious how you build that.
Yes.
And I think like that's been kind of a goal here too. Sometimes what happens in these things is everyone just kind of like goes off to their own space, right? But this idea, like, let's consciously sort of share, does create this sort of more Sangha community feeling, right?
Yeah.
And there's no compulsion to share whatever you don't want to share. Things are private.
No.
You keep them to yourself, right? But this idea that you have a meditation session and then we talk about the session afterwards is like quite interesting. A
Hmm.
couple of things I would say with that too, based on what you were saying. One is everybody's going to have up and down sessions, and that's something you learn too, which is kind of nice,
Yeah.
actually. The person who had a great session in the afternoon might find themselves struggling in the evening and vice versa, right?
Hmm.
And it sort of puts some context of like, oh, everyone's going through this. Okay. I felt like I was fucking Rinzai in the afternoon, like some great Zen master. In the
Hmm.
evening, I feel like a clown. It happens. It happens to everybody. And it happened on this very retreat.
Yes.
Some of the people who were struggling in the afternoon, in the evening, they were like, man, that was the best session ever. And someone else was like, wow, I was like totally in the zone in one spot. And that one was kind of more of a difficult one. So you learn that, right?
Mm.
It's also really interesting, I think, in the wrap up aspect of that, that we kind of talk about it as a group because there is kind of like what some tantric texts will talk about, like an overmind, a tantric mind that starts to develop between people. It was interesting because I was talking to one of the retreat participants afterwards, and we were talking about what we felt about like one of the sessions, and we were like amazingly like in sync, and
Yes.
like, and I don't know if you could put a timer to it exactly, if our timing on things were perfect, but the things that they were going through, I was like, oh yeah, I could feel that, and
Hmm.
that's kind of amazingly educational in and of itself if you get the chance to talk about that, because you start
Yeah.
to realize, wow, there really is a kind of interconnectivity. I thought
Yes.
I was the only one who was feeling this. No, other people were feeling that, in the group too. Or
Mm.
sometimes, we were talking about that, you realize like, oh, this person's having a hard time. Oh, this person's in the zone. You can really start to feel people in this highly attuned way when you do these sort of shared sessions, right?
Mm-hmm.
We do it a little bit like sometimes in Soto Zen, they turn and they face the wall, right? So it really kind of like you can get a group energy, but everything is like facing towards the wall. Bodhidharma, one of the founders of Zen in China, like, very famously meditated facing a wall for years and years and years. So it sort of has that feeling to it. But sometimes, like when I was doing my Zen retreats, they make people face one another. Make is the wrong word, but that's how you would situate people. And then you really feel that energetic exchange with like the other people in the group. And then you can start to realize how much you're affecting one another or sharing an experience together. It becomes kind of a joint experience. And you can almost compare notes afterwards and say, oh, yeah, I was like feeling this and that. Oh, me too. It's very interesting. And you learn from doing that. But if everyone
Mm-hmm.
goes away into their own space, you never have a chance to do that kind of processing, right? So I think this is very, very cool that, this has become part of our routine.
And it's nice in general, especially as society moves more further and further away, people move further and further away from each other. We might be connected through, devices or some useless chat platform. Um, to be able to talk in person openly in front of other people as well, it just reminds you of the, shared experience of humanity.
And that visceral feeling of being in the same space. It isn't
Yeah.
like, we're just like, yeah, yeah, you feel the energy of being with other human beings in an energetic space, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you can also feel how that affects your Shen, if you want to use Chinese medical talk, Chinese cultural talk, your mind or your spirit gets affected by this, and people like, are deeply affected by this.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, in terms of like memorable sits, we had kind of a really interesting one on whatever that was. Was that Friday afternoon? There was like a little like a tornado siren started going off
Oh
in
yeah,
Galena,
yeah,
Illinois.
yeah.
And we were kind of like, okay, what do we want to do? We're still going to sit. And we kind of like relocated down to the basement, right, of the space, do cautions, right, as meditators, right? So we kind of relocated our sitting accoutrements down to the lower level, reset things up, and we did our kind of retreat there. And it was a really, I mean, different people might have different experiences with that. It was very memorable for me, right? Because the sirens weren't going off like perpetual air raids or something like that, but there was like thunder and lightning and crashing and a little shaking.
Mm.
Power went off, but we kind of kept doing our little, safely doing our little meditative thing in the downstairs, and it had a lot of like interesting energy within it, right?
Mm-hmm.
All the storm clouds were going and everything was happening, and then we were kind of like in our little space doing our thing. And I think that's a sit like some sits you just remember, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll remember that one. It was unique enough, right? And at least for me, a lot of the group energy felt very, very good. There was a certain intensity to it,
Yeah.
right? Maybe everybody focused in a way just because the situation was so, it had an intensity to it. And it was cool. So that was kind of an interesting retreat and an interesting sit. It's the kind of sit you'll remember. And you got any more about? I'll share a little bit my reaction to it, but I'll throw it to you, Danny. What'd you think of it?
I wanted to just maybe pivot just a second and just acknowledge, we always like to acknowledge, but that like, spirituality is not devoid from reality. It is part of reality. Reality comes from the sense of spirituality. Spirituality comes from the sense of shared reality. So it's not, you know, being transcendent of reality is not necessarily leaving it in the mirror and going to some, heaven-like place. What Eric, there's a term for this in the Zen tradition. I think they're called like awakened zombies or something like this. Like,
I mean, it's that Zen deal where you have to like blend the conventional and the ultimate, right?
yeah, yeah,
Sometimes they'll like have these koans where it's like, I'm enlightened, now do the dishes,
right.
right? You have to be able to combine ultimate reality and conventional reality. Yeah.
Yeah. And so even while we were on retreat, we're trying to be focused and trying to have our teaching and our conversations wrapped around practice. But, we end up talking about, some political things and some different situations that people go through that are difficult and are questioning the motivations of other people and trying to drive home points of compassion and inclusiveness and different experiences that are, in the same vein. And it's to highlight that, like, even though we are lucky and are definitely conscious that we are fortunate to be able to a have a practice that is such a deep and grounding and cultivating force in our lives, meaning me and Eric, but then to be able to share that with other people in a way that like we feel is pretty authentic, like that we have received genuine teachings that probably go back quite some time. Obviously, there's some evolution as time goes on, and different teachers add different things, some iterations. But you know, the seed, the voice that was created is still alive in the teachers who gave it to us and to those who we shared it with. We're grateful to be able to do that. One, simultaneously, 1A, we realize that the world is a fucking mad place simultaneously, and there's a lot of people who are suffering and things going on that are happening simultaneous. So it's not lost on us, and I don't think it's lost on our retreat participants that this is a very it's an honorable thing to be able to participate in, A, to have the time or money to be able to take time off, and to acknowledge the difficulty of other people. And so we take this time really to dive in and cultivate ourselves so that we are even more helpful. We shine even more in the world. We can be our best selves for more of the day than not and try to impact as much of the people around us as possible through our actions, words, and our beings. So I just wanted to mention that so that, I say it for myself, even not for the audience.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was kind of an interesting when I woke up on Saturday morning. So this was sort of part of what we're trying to do with this. And I don't even know it was partially planned, was that it kind of became a mix of what you would call a teaching retreat and a practice retreat. In the practice retreat, you're spending most of your time like meditating. If I did a Zen practice retreat, you might meditate 12, 14 hours in the day or something, right? In between you take little breaks, but it's focused on like the practice aspect. And then sometimes you have things that are teaching retreats. You don't do as much practice, but people are presenting the ideas of the practice, right? And this was sort of a blend of the two in kind of this really nice way. And we had like for what you were talking about, Daniel, we had a lot of like somewhat interesting, sometimes intense discussions, right? The world, as we've been acknowledging in our podcast over the past year and change, right, hasn't been the most easy place to live, right? For a lot of people, it's kind of chaotic. People were bringing some of that stuff into the space too, a little bit, right? But we're not going to like ignore the reality of that too. That's part of life as well
Hmm.
that you're trying to understand. I woke up on Saturday morning and I was like, we didn't get a chance to talk about it. I kept thinking maybe there's some point during one of the teaching sessions where I would make this point. And it never felt like it was its sweet spot to bring it up. And you don't want to bring up something that would be like tangential, to what was happening in terms of the flow. But it was one of those things where you wake up and you're like, okay, I want to see if I can maybe present this idea and see how it will hit with people. One of the big ideas that comes up when you do Buddhist Tantra is the fact that we're spirits that are connected to matter, right? We're spirits that get entwined with, our physical bodies, but, we have that sort of that quality to us, right? And so that is part of like Buddhist tantric philosophy. And that came up in part of the discussions we were having. So if you can think like we're spirit and energy connected with matter, connected with sometimes in Chinese medicine, they call that Jing, right? The physical essence of the body and the spirit, the energy, and the Jing comes together. And they'll call this sometimes the three treasures in the Chinese medicine or in the Taoist world. But I was going to make the point with people, especially after I heard a lot of the discussion things that just sort of naturally veered in these ways, that were also, spirit, energy, and matter that's then tied to like I was using the Bob Marley phrase, the system, as in the Bob Marley song, fighting against the system. Ooh wee. My favorite Bob Marley songs. You hear it in the one drop. Give it a listen. It's a great track. But he has that line about being in a system, right? And like, we live within a system too. We incarnate into this system that we exist with other beings within. And that I think from a Buddhist tantric point of view is what you might call collective karma. All of a sudden you're in this shared system that you share with the other beings around you, other human beings in this case, right? Within this shared system. And a lot of what was happening was people were asking questions about the system per the Bob Marley song, right? Because people are asking a lot of questions about the system now, right? And like what is going potentially wrong with it and how we have to transcend it or how we have to transform it. And so that was sort of a part of the energy of what was happening in that retreat to my eyes. I think
Mm.
a lot of people are thinking about that question, from a Buddhist tantric point of view. It's, I think the way I would want to frame that or model that would be, okay, we're spirit connected with energy and our bodies, but that body and our lives have been kind of also entwined with like a system that you kind of like become kind of entwined with as well. And then you may feel good about that system or bad about that system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just like thinking about having that as part of our teaching retreat. The other point I wanted to make around that was something like, if you start looking at the system around you and you're questioning it, one of the other things you wonder is like, why don't these other beings question this? Which is kind of like comes up, I think, in those retreat spaces too. I'm questioning this system. Why isn't everybody questioning this system? Some
Right.
people are. Some people seem like they're not. Like, what's going on here? And I just wanted to talk about like the karmic aspect of that, which isn't always said this explicitly, I think, in the Buddhist and tantric teachings, but I think could be. I think this is like something you can kind of share about this, which is like if you incarnated in a certain system in the Bob Marley sense over and over again, you are sort of used to that system. And that system seems almost natural to you. Classically, if you get to like the old school, like the historical Buddha, there was like a caste system. And if you incarnate into a caste system over and over again, you can kind of sort of like it's like your consciousness and your spirit gets conditioned into believing that there's actual castes. And people come from the outside and you're like, what the fuck is this? There's no castes. That's some crazy ass talk. This person isn't intrinsically like this, and you're like this, and this other one's over here into these groups. That's fucking wacko. Obviously, you can see that. And Buddha was like, no, there's no castes, right? That's a crazy thought, right? To think that there's
Mm-hmm.
castes. And we
Mm-hmm.
have our own versions of that, whether that's, people think that people from different races are a certain way, or people think that people from different genders or sexual orientations are like this or like that. That's crazy talk, right?
Mm.
The fact that, some people have all the money and other people don't get shit, that's crazy talk. That's just being born into a system maybe over and over again, where you just get used to the way that system works. And you can feel that tension in you sometimes where you're like, okay, maybe I'm not entirely from this system and I feel the tension and I'm going to question it. And then you wonder, why aren't these other beings questioning this system as intently as I am? There's a, does a lot of political commentary, Jennifer Welch, and she talks about growing up in the South and just watching how you have these like kind of the Southern preacher culture where that person runs off with everybody's money and
Mm.
buys a big fancy car and everybody else is poor. And you're like, why does that seem okay to them? And like, if you get to the Buddhism of it, if you've been in that over and over and over again, that just seems natural to you, you know? Like, of course, that's just how it is. But if you step into that from the outside, and I think growing up even as a girl, she felt like, I guess I'm not from here, on some level, right? This looks
Mm.
crazy to me, but this all seems natural. So I was going to share it with our retreat participants. It's a deep thing, but I thought a lot of like that was happening, as it should be, I think. A lot of people are asking, okay, Bob Marley song, you got a point. Fighting against the system, questioning the system. Okay, we have to do that now. We're just in
Mm.
that thing. And that came into some of the retreat energy as well, and some of the conversations that we had during the teaching parts and then between sessions. Kind of a longer thing, but I thought I would share it. I thought it was
Mm-hmm.
interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I always
Well,
think
yeah,
about it from a Buddhist point of view.
yeah. Well, that's part of the thing, is as you begin to learn and develop yourself, there's the aspect of deconditioning. That's
Yeah.
absolutely part of what we're doing, and conditioning is exactly what keeps us separate. That gives us the strong feeling of you and I, of me and you, of dark and light, of duality, essentially. And so, taking down those walls between even just people in a small community, and literally like a half a dozen people, does help to do that on a regular basis, where you get to see eye to eye. Because I make this argument all the time. I think when you're in person and you're arguing with somebody, usually, not always, but usually, we want to find consensus. Even if we're disagreeing, it feels much better, at least for me and, my life, to, okay, fine, we're going to agree to disagree.
Or people will argue, but it doesn't get vitriolic in the same way that it does in these
Correct.
toxic spaces, right?
Yeah, exactly. When you're shouting across, social media spaces, or you're speaking through the media, or
You
you're,
can't say that stuff to someone's face.
no, you can't. And you
You just
wouldn't.
you wouldn't. You just like actually can't, even if you tried to be really hard,
Yeah,
right?
you just
You're
you
like
just
such an
really,
asshole saying those things
yeah.
that you wouldn't do it, right?
Yeah, because I think it's you feel the other person. So there's some level of like, I don't know. I don't know
Yeah.
that I want to do that. It's not, they're nice in person, right? Versus the character that they project and share to the rest of the world.
Or the stereotype I have them in my mind or something.
Exactly. Exactly. So, yeah, so that's part of the thing that happens
We
is,
weren't like it was interesting because it wasn't like there was a lot of debate per se, though there was a little bit, some people like to like debate, so that's okay.
yeah,
That's good.
yep,
In
yep,
Tibet, they debate in the courtyards, right? You go out in the courtyard and you debate.
yeah,
Totally fine. But the sharing of it was interesting. You could feel that all of us, each in our moments, was like still, okay, how does this fit into what's happening in the world at large? And I was like, yeah, it's one of those things. You sort of go, if you reincarnate over and over again into a system, it starts to seem normal, natural to you. It feels like, okay, of course that's obvious. There's castes.
yeah,
Of course, I'm in England over and over again. Of course, there's lords and underlings to the lords. Of course, why wouldn't there be? And yeah, you step in from the outside. Well, that's just crazy talk. I mean, America over and over again. Of course, there's oligarchs that own everything, and everyone else just struggles to get by, and they dominate everything. Of course, it's just like that.
yeah, that's how it is.
Rockefellers and Carnegies, and now whoever you want to put on the top of that pyramid now. Okay, of course. It's
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah,
Yeah, retreat is a place where you go to reprogram yourself intentionally.
yeah.
That's if I want to sum it up, it's intentional reprogramming.
I had like as we get to the end of the episode, maybe we
Yeah.
got like 8, 9 minutes left or something at the most, right? I like in that afternoon one when it was all thunder and lightning, you get into these little kind of altered states of consciousness and you have these kinds of interesting thoughts. You're concentrating on the practice, but sometimes, the signals are coming in and like I shared it afterwards with the group and I was like, okay, well, listen, I'm a little bit of in a Carl Jung mood over here. I hope it's okay with everybody. But as I was hearing the storms coming through, one of our retreat participants the day before, as we were just discussing things outside the session, there was sort of religious conversation going on a little bit. And they were saying, well, the God of the Old Testament, Adonai or Yahweh, that was a storm god, and you just brought that issue up. So we're
Mm,
sitting and the storm is blowing through and the thunder and the lightning is going. It was like decently intense. And we had done some episodes, maybe a couple years ago now at this point, where we talked about Carl Jung's Answer to Job. You can go back and
mm,
flash back to those episodes if you want to check it out, listener. But it's really like some people say this is the most profound Carl Jung book or something, or at least the most personal one, where he really tried as best he could to kind of share some of his deepest ideas. And I was really having, we're doing this tantric retreat, which is all about like the energies meeting, the female and the male energies being in union, right? Like
hmm.
classic tantra. Though, of course, just to say, if you're a gay person, you don't have to visualize it as male and female. You can visualize it however you want. We talked about that issue too.
Hmm.
Maybe more for
It's
another
got to be
topic.
spicy. You want it to be
Don't
saucy.
make it spicy. If you're not into the ladies or not into the fellas, change
Spice
it.
it up.
Spice it up. It can be you and another one of whoever you like,
And
right?
if you love yourself, then two of you.
I've talked with like some ladies about that. Like one person I like find most attractive is me. There might be some fellas like that too. I shouldn't just leave it to the ladies, but I've actually had
Yeah.
that conversation with some ladies, like, secretly. Yeah. Anyways, it's really funny. But the storm clouds and the storm god was going through, and I was thinking, okay, man, it's like, why, if it's a storm god, why is this god so angry? And I was just having those thoughts go through my head as we were doing the meditation. And I was like, oh, because he doesn't have his consort. He doesn't have like his significant other. He doesn't have his love. And he's so
His
pissed
bae.
off. His bae or his boo. And I was just like, that's so interesting, and you could take that either literally, I told my son about that and he was like, you literally believe in the storm god? And I was like, that's not the point. The point is that somehow you invented a really angry divinity It
Mm-hmm.
becomes the point that's isolated from its pair. It's not able to have love from the other half of the divine, however you want to frame that. And that makes for a very angry divinity.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, I think that's a truth. I really see the depth of that, right? Change your orientation to what the divine is, make it about intimacy and love and connection and sensuality. You get a different divinity, you probably get a different culture on some level, right? Reframes everything. I
Yeah.
think, and I was just having those thoughts. I was like, okay, cool. I'm gonna share this. I let it go at some point. I'll share this with the group afterwards. We'll see if it hits or doesn't hit. But I was like, yeah, that really feels something like that. Yeah. And then the other one I had that was kind of personal was I had a little bit about, the one sit we did was a little bit more intense. And I was like, okay, how are people handling the intensity of the sit? It turned out good for a lot of the people, but I was like thinking, okay, maybe some of the group is like, someone's knee is hurting, or maybe someone's having some other things. And it turned out to be kind of true. There were some people who had a little more, we go through ups and downs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, it's kind of, even when it's a little bit rougher, it feels good at the end because you kind of like, you went on a journey, right? So it pays off in the end. One of the guys who was having kind of a tougher sit in that particular session said he just started laughing, that it was okay, this is a tough one for me. And he laughed and he got back to it, you know. Um, but as I was sitting there, I was thinking, okay, I'm feeling a lot of compassion for the group. And I was like a little bit worried about people in the group. And then a really interesting thing happened for me. I started thinking about, I had a really strong sense of like uh, one of these Buddhist goddesses, Tara, right? Love and compassion. I really felt her, And then I had this moment where I was thinking about like, she has a maternal quality to her. And I started thinking about my own mom. I grew up in a household where it was pretty emotionally and physically violent. And I remembered my feelings of wanting to protect my mom. And it was very moving for me, you know? And as far as like, I think what has been part of the retreats that we've been doing, which I think is a great idea that you brought into it, Daniel, was afterwards I was able to share that with the group, and people are like, okay, cool, great that you share, and that makes it easier for other people to share. So, those are sort of maybe two of my. I had some other retreat experiences that were good. They're a little bit more on like insights into the practice, insights into the meditations. But as far as emotional stuff, that's just a couple of them, just to give a feel. Any particularly good ones for you want to share, or
No, that's good.
feels good? Okay,
Yeah, that feels good.
guess we
All
can call
right.
it an episode.
Yes, sir. Well, we want to thank all our participants who were there. If you listen to this, thanks for attending. If you're interested in attending something in the future, please feel free to hit us up at ginandtantra@gmail.com. We'll get you on the list. And when we do something again here, hopefully in the next, 6 to 12 months, then we will definitely include you on that and get you hooked in. We also, offered it online. So for people who can't make it maybe in person, but want to attend online, from the comfort of your own home or hotel room or a cardboard box outside of a large building, whatever, as long as you got Wi-Fi, you're good.
We'll make it work for you.
It'll
Hmm.
make it work for you. So again, hit us up, ginandtantra@gmail.com. Like, comment, subscribe, do all those things. We appreciate it. You can leave us also a message on the Instagram at the Gin and Tantra podcast. We are working on some more regular, I think, written output. So, be on the lookout for, stuff like this, but we'll also
Maybe
keep everybody
potential
updated.
Substack in the offering or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. So, anyways, we appreciate everybody tuning in. This is the labor of love, like we always say, and we appreciate all the kind of interaction. So, feel free to drop all of your comments and concerns below, and we will definitely do our best to get to you. So, for Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys at the next one. Peace.